All right, I see a lot of you have joined us this afternoon for the Massachusetts Innovation Pathways Toolkit Release Workshop online, but we are going to wait just a minute or two to let a few more folks join us as we creep to a couple minutes past 1 o'clock. My aim is to start in about 90 seconds, so I appreciate your patience in the meantime. All right, I'm going to get us started this morning, and we might still have some folks jumping on in the next minute or two, and that's okay. But I want to respect the time of all of you who've carved out some space for this workshop. So welcome to the Massachusetts Innovation Pathways Toolkit launch party of sorts online. We're calling it a webinar, but we are excited to have you join us this afternoon. And this will be an interactive workshop, and it should give you plenty of opportunity to get to know our toolkit. Next, please. So before we really get started with the content of this workshop, I just want to remind us all, at this point, many of you are quite used to Zoom meetings, but these are some suggestions for making the most of this online experience. The first would be to please make sure you're muted so that we have minimal background noise, and to adjust your lighting if you're going to speak so that we can see you a little bit better. We do have an active chat happening in the chat room space. You can find a button to click to open chat at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd like to see presenters, you can click speaker view, or that's actually the easier way to see the slides as well that we're sharing. And finally, please use the raise hand feature to get our attention if prompted or needed. If you have a very specific need, it might be easier just to type it in the chat. And later in the meeting, we'll hear more about breakout rooms. Next. So I'd like to start by introducing some others who are from our team who are joining us today. From the Center for Collaborative Education, that's my organization. I'd like to introduce first myself. My name is Diana LeBeau. I'm the Director of District and School Design Programs. And I work at CCE in a variety of projects, but in the Innovation Pathways, I'm excited to be working with some of my colleagues to partner with DESE to help lead some technical assistance events to support schools moving to adopt strong innovation pathways. With me today from CCE is Dawn Shearer-Corin. She'll be facilitating the chat today. Callie Cornell, who will be sharing in some of the presentation with me, and particularly talking about the toolkit. Allison Plez is here to help with tech needs, and our organization's executive director, Oscar Santos, I think is joining us as well. Also with me, I wanted to introduce Jennifer Guatkin and Carrie Occasion from DESE, the Department of Ed, who I would love to give the opportunity to each say a couple quick words about this toolkit and about the Innovation Pathways Initiative. So we'll start with Jennifer.
Good afternoon, friends. It's so good to see many of your faces. I think that, yeah, a lot of you are actively participating with the video. Thank you for taking time out today to spend an hour with us. The Center for Collaborative Education and Carrie and I have been working quite hard on this toolkit. It's something that we've been wanting to provide for you since really the inception of Innovation Pathways, which launched just a couple of years ago. Well, actually, we're going into the 4th cohort, so it was summer of 2017. You're all at various points in either you might be designees or you might be just interested in learning more about Innovation Pathways. We hope that this toolkit will serve each of you, however you need for it to serve you. And we look forward to doing this official launch.
Yeah,
thanks, Jennifer. Carrie, would you mind saying a couple words as well?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for being here today. It looks like we have a big group. We're really excited about the Innovation Pathways Toolkit. I know I've been talking about it in several different projects that we're working on, including the work with the Mass Hire Boards. I think this will really help the Mass Hire Boards more deeply understand the work of Innovation Pathways and how they can be thought partners in this work. And I'm so grateful to CCE for all of their support with getting the IP Toolkit ready and launched. And also a special shout out to Jennifer Guatkin, because she's just worked tirelessly on the Innovation Pathways work, and it's just been phenomenal and growing, and she's just very responsive, and I'm just really proud of all the work that she's been able to send to the field. And I also want to thank the field for being on the call and being receptive to this work. So I really appreciate you and all that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. Next slide, Callie. So CCE, as I mentioned, is providing technical assistance on this workshop. Our mission is really to support schools as they transform to ensure all students succeed. Next. Just wanted, before we jump in today, to make sure you're all aware of two things. One is that we have a workshop on Wednesday, June 10th, virtual workshop online, for new and prospective Innovation Pathways applicants. So I know if most of you who are here are probably here because you're already looped into that community of practice and are actively either working on a new pathway or have already got one under your belt, at least a year or two. But you may know others, and there may be some folks joining us today that are just thinking about it or getting started. So we will be sharing information, and it's actually already posted on the DESE webpage about this virtual workshop. Also wanted to make sure you're all in the loop that the Innovation Pathways and Connecting Activities convening, while it has been postponed to fall 2020, is still going to be fantastic, and we still look forward to seeing you all there. And finally, we wanted to direct you to the address at which you could find event registration, resources, materials, and most importantly for today, our toolkit. And you can find that through the tiny URL at the bottom of your screen. And perhaps one of my colleagues can actually type that in the chat so it's clickable for those of you who want to follow. Next. So today's goals are to introduce our Innovation Pathways Toolkit, to provide opportunities to engage with colleagues around sample resources from it, and to build connections across the network, which we know is important for all of you. And is a strong contributor to continuous improvement in all of your settings. That's one of the reasons why we do have breakout sessions in this and many of our workshops. We find that the wisdom is truly in the room, not in the heads of those of us leading this, but in the heads of all of you who are leading the work. So I hope you take advantage of the opportunity to talk to folks in roles similar to or different than your own that are involved with this community of practice. Next. So one thing I do want to highlight today is that this was initially built for those who are already engaged in Innovation Pathways work. However, we do know there's folks joining us from other, we were able to look through the registration and see folks are joining us from other perspectives. Some of you all are from the industry side, some of you all are working for state agencies, Department of Education, other departments, nonprofits that might be partnering with schools or interested in learning about this initiative. Some people who might be just interested in maybe that June workshop, finding more about Innovation Pathways in thinking about a future year. Whatever reason you're joining us, we hope you can benefit from it. But I do want to just explain that the agenda is going to very much represent a little bit of an insider knowledge. So please feel free to reach out in the chat if anything isn't clear. But the agenda today, we're just going to start with these connections and learning a little bit about the initiative. We'll introduce the Pathways Toolkit to you all. We'll have some breakout discussions, and then we'll come together at the end to share out and close. Next. Something we don't ever want to neglect is to pause and take a minute. We may be online, but community agreements, or what some of you may think of as norms, are still critical to keeping our groups humming. And some of these are here to really ensure equity of voice and full participation and strong outcomes from our participation. Today, I particularly want to encourage you all to be present as much as you can. That's the fourth community agreement. But we know that all of you have many competing demands on your time. So we respect that you are all engaging to the extent that you're able in these unusual times. Next. So in the chat window, as we connect together today, I'm going to invite you all to each share your name, your school or district, if you are affiliated with one. If not, then your organization or company. And finally, what's your biggest accomplishment with your pathways this year? Now, if you're new to this or you're not yet affiliated with a pathway, you can feel free just to share with us why you've joined us today. Take a minute to let you all respond in the chat window if you can. Dawn, what are we seeing in the chat? Oh, Dawn might still be paying attention to the chat and muted.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. The chat is moving very quickly and we are seeing folks from all over the state, various schools and districts. I see Holyoke and Lawrence, Everett. Some folks are talking about looking forward to receiving a designation as they're in the process of pursuing that, while others are already either in an innovative pathway or recently have received notice that they will be joining the work.
Thank you, Dawn. That's great. So you can continue to use the chat today, but thank you all for sharing a quick connections with us. Next slide. So innovation pathways, just to give a summary for those of you who have or have not been involved, this might be of curious interest. There are currently 99 pathways in Massachusetts, 38 of which are new this year. So it's now a really robust community of practice. Innovation pathways are in 42 schools across 36 districts. And I've seen a lot of those districts cross our chat and a few that aren't yet districts. So you might become 37. And we've reached, most importantly, over 4,000 students across Massachusetts through Innovation Pathways programming, which is a tremendous way to offer opportunity. Next slide. A couple of little, I don't know, I'm a data nerd, a couple of data nerd details to share. Across the sectors, we see pathways in each of 5 industry sectors: manufacturing, business, finance, information, healthcare and social assistance, and then environmental and life sciences. Not quite evenly distributed, but pretty generously distributed across the 5 different sectors. And excitingly, 14 of the 16 Mass Hire Boards are active Innovation Pathways partners. So we're only excited to only see this grow over the next few years, but the work that you all are doing is contributing to a real movement in Massachusetts. Next. So this year, in terms of technical assistance, CCE has worked with DESE to ensure there were a few webinars, workshops, convening. One, we wanted to have 2, but that will be postponed to the fall. We've had 1 site visit, and again, we'd love to have another. But given the circumstances, we're just going to make sure we really prioritize having some on-site visits next year. We've covered topics such as capstones, rubric design, equity-minded design, and an emphasis on student and mentor relationships. And we will continue to respond to what we hear from you all as important priority topics for the years to come. Next. Before we dive into breakout rooms and all of these wonderful opportunities that the Zoom platform allows us, I do want to acknowledge that this current situation is not forever. We know that. We are all joining today via Zoom, a workshop that was intended to be one of several at the Spring Innovation Pathways and Connecting Activities convening. This cartoon, I think, represents what's going through a lot of our minds lately. We're counting electronic Zoom window sheep instead of other kinds of sheep at bedtime, and it's keeping us up at night a little more than usual. We hope that this workshop strikes the balance between leveraging the opportunities to still connect and the tools afforded to us through technology, while allowing for the kind of flexibility that we know is necessary in unusual times. And we hope we're both forward thinking in terms of providing tools that are useful in the years ahead when this is behind us, as well as immediately useful now, even in these circumstances. Next. At this point, I am going to turn it over to Callie, who will talk us through what you've all come here for, our Innovation Pathways Toolkit.
Great, thanks so much, Diana. So as my colleagues have said, the DESE and CCE Innovation Pathways team is so excited to share this toolkit with you today. We've designed this toolkit to be helpful in providing a structure and resources to support your design of rigorous and student-centered pathways in your schools. And so the processes, tools, and resources that are within this toolkit are certainly not exhaustive, nor is it intended that Innovation Pathways design and development teams necessarily make use of each of the tools within this toolkit, because there's a lot embedded within here. But rather, the resources are shared with the intention to support a variety of design, development, and implementation needs in a way that's customizable according to your school and your particular pathways context. So you might choose to use the resources in a way that are most helpful to your team, and no matter where you are in the design process or through the implementation process. And based on your feedback, emerging research, and different best practices, we'll continue to add to this toolkit over time. This tool is really intended to be iterative, and we hope that we can continue to add to the resources, the tools, and the guides that are embedded here over time and on a regular basis. So the Innovation Pathways Toolkit is organized into 4 sections that hopefully help support sort of your best use of this product. So it includes an overview section that outlines the context of innovation pathways in the state of Massachusetts, and it also includes introductory information about the guiding principles and references the full criteria requirements from DESE. In section 2, this is where we provide some resources, guides, and tools that DESE has released that support the planning and design of required elements of pathways. In the next section, we provide a recommended 4-part cyclical process for thinking about, designing, and ultimately implementing innovation pathways programs. And then finally, in section 4, it includes a variety of local and national templates, protocols, and tools, includes examples and materials from Massachusetts specific schools. And we hope that as we work with you over the coming years, we're able to add more and more to these tools and materials within that come from the Innovation Pathways community of practice. Over the next few slides, I'll walk through a brief overview of each of the sections, and later in the webinar, you'll have an opportunity to look a little bit more closely at each of the, or at some of the specific tools embedded within the toolkit. So within the first section, we have the overview. So this first component of the toolkit includes opening letters from Carrie Cation and Jennifer Guatkin, who you heard from just a few moments ago, as well as a foreword from Oscar Santos, the Executive Director at the Center for Collaborative Education. This is also where you can find a 1-page overview about the Innovation Pathways Initiative and the guiding principles, all embedded there within that first section. The second section includes our core design elements. So here you'll find all of the core materials to support planning and design that were authored by DESE. And so it includes core design resources related to career advising, integrated instruction, labor market information, and work-based learning. A few specific examples of what you can find within this section includes the elements of a model internship program resource guide. So this was a guide that was published by DESE, which presents materials and approaches on internship program design from the Connecting Activities programs throughout Massachusetts. In this section, you'll also be able to find the Massachusetts Work-Based Learning template and supporting materials that go along with that particular plan and template. We also, in this section, is where you can find information about the Massachusetts School to Career Connecting Activities Initiative. So Connecting Activities, for those who might not be familiar, is a statewide network organized through the 16 Mass Hire workforce boards, connecting employers and schools to support work-based learning and other career development education activities for students. The Connecting Activities Initiative shares resources with the Massachusetts High Quality College and Career Pathways Initiative, and also provides resources that are applicable to Innovation Pathways designees. And then sort of one final example that you'll find within this section of the toolkit is the regional labor market blueprints. And these blueprints provide an analysis of regional labor market across Massachusetts, sort of identifying industries and occupations that provide growing and emerging opportunities that are within your area. So again, this is only a sampling of the resources that are shared within this section. We encourage you to review the material in the section, as they're crucial not only to meeting the Innovation Pathways criteria for designation, but also for helping to think through the comprehensive design of your pathway programs. In the third section, we have a recommended pathways design process. This process comes from working with CCE and DESE to come up with a 4-part cycle to guide school teams through initial pathways conception all the way through implementation and continuous improvement processes. We've broken this recommended cycle into 4 phases. So as you'll see in the graphic on the screen, it's building a vision, understanding your community, designing and planning, and then finally implementing and progress monitoring. And although within our toolkit the phases are numbered, they're rarely approached in simple chronological order. Often multiple steps or phases occur simultaneously, and sometimes you sort of have to go back and retrace some of those in order for your overall pathway or pathways to be successful. So, however, in these phases that are described within this section are in an order that can serve as a logical reference for you, your school teams, your district teams that are engaging in pathway design and development. So in the first phase, the building a vision phase, this focuses on big picture vision for pathway programs. It's grounded in equity and culturally responsive practice. This phase provides visioning and team building resources that emphasize ensuring that a vision simultaneously aligns with your school's identity and existing mission, but also results in equitable opportunities and outcomes for all students in your school. In the second phase, understanding your community, this is where school teams identify key elements of the Massachusetts Innovation Pathways programs. It might be where you identify stakeholders in your community that you need to bring into the process and begin to design roles and responsibilities around designing your pathways program and systems. In the next phase, designing and planning, this is where school teams brainstorm, map, and assess college and career readiness policies, programs, and practices, and where you'll begin to understand the knowledge, skills, and competencies that students know and need to be able to demonstrate for specific industries, and develop a pathway system framework that includes those 5 guiding principles of innovation pathways. And then the final recommended design process phase is implementing and progress monitoring. When you're in this stage, you already have your students enrolled in the program, they're taking part in the pathway. The materials that are shared within this section are really intended to support growth and improvement of your pathway programs. So in this section of the toolkit, you'll find materials around program self-assessment, reflecting, and protocols related to addressing emerging issues. We've done a little bit of talking at you for the last few moments, so we'd like to hear from you now. You should have a poll pop up on your screen in just a moment, and we'd like to know, based on your current experience, what phase of the design process was or currently is the most challenging for you and your school team. We're curious, is it the building a vision phase that includes early planning and early thinking? Is it the understanding your community phase where you've gathered input, you're collecting data, you're looking at labor market information, or perhaps it's something else? So we'll give you about 60 seconds. We'll pause here if you can respond to the poll. And if you respond something else, we'd love for you to include in the chat box what that something else is, what that other sort of phase of implementation or phase of design is that sort of, most difficult or challenging for you. So we'll pause there and give you a moment to respond to the poll. Great. I'm seeing, I think most folks have answered at this point, so we'll go ahead and end the poll. And it looks like you've got, so you should be able to see these results on your screen here, but it looks like most folks are having the most challenging time around the design and planning processes around curriculum, logistics, partnerships, those sorts of things. I'm curious for my other colleagues that are on the call, if there's anything that's popped up within the chat box around the something else piece. We had about 10% of participants respond with something else. And so curious if there are some things that are listed there.
Hi, Callie. This is Dawn again. So a couple of things came through the chat. One of them is around ensuring sustainability and preventing attrition in their enrollment. Another participant talked about understanding the designation process fully and wanting to be, clear about where they actually stand and what to do next. And then there was a third response also, and this might be a question that one of us could respond to in the chat. It's a question around whether or not their school is big enough. There's a school of 360 students from 7 to 12, and are they actually big enough to pursue a pathway? I also wanted to just mention quickly, Callie, that Diana did enter the tiny URL that was on one of the earlier slides in the chat. And I wanted to announce to everybody on the call that if they scroll through their chat and look for Diana LeBeau, you'll see the link to the tiny URL. Thanks. Yep.
Thanks so much, Dawn. And so as a reminder, that tiny URL link links you directly to the Innovation Pathways website where you can find this toolkit. So you can see that there, but also registration information and resources materials from all of the technical assistance events we've done thus far this year. And then we'll continue to add to that as we have more events and more resources to share over time. So great, thanks so much everyone for responding. We really appreciate it. Really interesting to see sort of where you are in the process, or sort of what pieces have come up as the most challenging for you. And so I'm going to share over this next slide a few examples of the resources that are in the Pathways Design Process section that perhaps can help you in the phase that you're finding most challenging. So we have an Innovation Pathways criteria planning document. So for the folks that were curious about, are they meeting all of the criteria and all of the requirements of a Innovation Pathways designation, this tool breaks down all of the criteria required to be awarded an Innovation Pathways designation. It's organized by guiding principle, and it allows you to track your planning for each criteria. So there's an indicator to be able to indicate whether or not you started planning for that piece, whether you're in progress in planning, or whether you've completed or sort of checked the box on that particular criteria piece. And so this resource is particularly helpful for those who are in the early planning phases and getting ready to apply for an Innovation Pathways designation, but also can be helpful for those who are already designees, sort of checking back in and making sure that you're sort of paying attention to the different elements of the guiding principles. We have in this section a vision of a graduate protocol, which can help you to develop a vision of what a graduate from your school should know, understand, and be able to do. It can also be used to develop what a graduate from your pathway program should know, understand, and be able to do upon completion of your pathway. And so many of you might be familiar with developing vision of a graduate protocols overall. This tool might be able to help you either do school-wide visioning or also program-specific visioning. In this design cycle section, we've also included a technical and adaptive problems protocol, which is intended for school or design teams during implementation as you determine how best to approach various challenges or issues that you encounter. So if you're in that design and planning phase and feeling that pressure of the challenges that are arising, this tool might be able to help you sort of identify and move forward on each of those sort of problems of practice. We also in this section have included a family and community engagement rubric. This is a resource from our colleagues at WestEd, which is designed to improve schools through high impact family engagement practices. So again, this is only a sampling of all of the resources that are included in section 3. So we encourage you and your teams to explore the materials that are here and use the tools that are applicable to your context and where you are within the design process. The final section of the toolkit is where you'll find the templates, protocols, tools, and other materials to help with the design and implementation of various components of your pathway programs. We've organized this section into 10 subsections to make it a bit easier to find or explore the resources that you're looking for. And within these 10 subsections, which are on your screen now, we include resources, materials from local partners, from national organizations, and some school-specific examples from Massachusetts high schools. As I did within the previous sections, I'll sort of briefly share just a few examples of the materials that you can see within this section. So we have a primer developed for the Innovation Pathways community of practice that outlines some strategies to practice remote work-based learning skills. So we suspect that this resource will be particularly relevant given the current impacts of COVID-19. Last month, CCE hosted a workshop for the Innovation Pathways community of practice focused on development of student-mentor relationships and work-based learning experiences. The recording of this workshop, which was held virtually, and the presentation slides are linked here within this section. We've included a sample letter to industry, sort of inviting folks in to work with your program and sort of start that partnership up. There are sample pathway course descriptions in a few different pathway sectors. We have the model internship program guide and a series of a day at work videos. So the folks at ConnectEd have released a series of videos that sort of show what a day in the life is of some folks within different industries and different sectors in different positions. There are a lot more resources within this section, and so we encourage you again to explore the resources section of the toolkit. It has materials that are relevant to classroom teachers, school building leaders, district leaders, and industry and community partners. So there's something for everybody throughout this section of the toolkit. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll add to this toolkit over time. The resources section in particular will be updated regularly to share more useful materials as we continue to work and learn with you over the next few years. Before we move into our breakout sessions, I wanted to pause here and see if any questions have come up in the chat box. And if you right now have a question, if you could type it into the chat box, we'll sort of take a moment to answer those now, but we'll also be monitoring through the rest of the webinar in case questions come up. So I'll ask Don or any other colleagues if there's anything that's come up within the chat box that we should pause to answer now.
I can just share, I have not seen any questions specific to this section of the workshop. And also just to let you all know that we will come back to a Q&A section at the end.
Thanks so much, Diana. So given that, we'll sort of jump right into our breakout session. So you've had a chance to hear a little bit about what's in the full toolkit. And while we're unable to have this unveiling, if you will, of the toolkit in person as we had planned, we still want to provide you with a little bit of time to look more closely at some of the resources in the toolkit and talk with peers. Before we do that and move into small group conversation, it's a good time to reference our community agreements again. Diana shared these at the beginning, so I won't read each one or go through them again. However, I would encourage you to choose one of these agreements for yourself. You don't need to share with anyone which one you're thinking about, but we'd ask that you just be mindful of a particular agreement for yourself as we move into the upcoming discussion. So in the next about 15 minutes or so, we'll give you a chance to explore the toolkit with colleagues as best we can in a virtual format. So we'll share a Google Doc with you on the next slide that reiterates the instructions I'm about to give. So please know you'll have written instructions for what I'm about to say. We'll put that on the next slide. But once we're in the breakout rooms, we'll ask you to determine roles. So each group will need a facilitator that will guide the conversation. We'll give some prompts to help you with that. A recorder to capture highlights of your conversation, and then finally a reporter to share highlights for when you come back to the full group. When we come back to the full group, we'll be asking just a few folks to report out on some of the highlights of your conversation. So as a group, we'll ask you to select a tool to take a look at. There are direct links to each of the resources. We have 3 resources we'll be asking you to take a look at, and there are links within the Google Docs for you to choose, but we'll ask you as a group to choose the elements of a model internship programs guide, the technical and adaptive problems protocol, or the strategies to practice remote work-based learning skills. So once as a group you've chosen which one you'll take a look at collectively, you'll then click on that link and then take a few minutes to review the chosen resource individually. We have a number of prompts for you for that conversation. So CCE and DESE staff will be in and out of those breakout rooms or might join some of your rooms, but unfortunately we can't all be in every room to facilitate. So we've given you some prompts within the document I'll share in just a moment. And what we'd really like you to focus on as a group is what resonates with you about the resource. How might you use the resource? Like when and with whom would you use the resource? And there's space at the bottom of the Google Doc to record, for the recorder to share the highlights, to type in the highlights from your discussion. And then finally, in the last minute or so, just determines what will be shared out by that reporter. So I referenced this Google document. So we'll take a moment, if you could please type this link into your browser. It's tiny.cc/IP-toolkit. And if one of my colleagues could also put this in the chat box so that it's a clickable link for folks, that might be really helpful as well. So thank you, Diana. I see if you look in your chat box, Diana has added this link so you can click directly on that. And it should bring you and open up a link for you to a Google Doc entitled Innovation Pathways Toolkit Release. And so we'll pause here, give everyone a moment to get that document open. Great, we're seeing lots of folks still entering into that Google document. We'll give about another 10 to 15 seconds. Excellent. So at this point, you should have the Google Doc open on your screen. If you didn't have enough time to get to the website or need just an extra moment, the link is both in the chat box and then here on the screen at tiny.cc/IP-toolkit. As you move into your breakout rooms, be sure to unmute yourself and share your video so that others in your small group can see and hear you for your discussion. In just a second, you should see a pop-up on your screen asking you to join a breakout room. When that appears, please click join. Our colleague Allison will be here in the main room, in the main space now, for anyone needing help to troubleshoot to get into those breakout spaces. So Allison, if you could please put us into our breakout rooms. Everyone enjoy your conversations and we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes. I think most folks are back now with us. It should be auto sort of kicking everyone back to our main space. So thanks for rejoining us. I'm going to have Diana share or sort of lead us through our remaining few minutes here. But hope that you all enjoyed the short few minutes that you were able to get with connections for colleagues.
Sorry, I was muted. So thank you all. And I know those were brief conversations. And I'm glad that we had them. I know that I could hear some great little tidbits in the room that I was in. And I'm hopeful those kinds of conversations were happening in the other rooms as well. Next slide, please. I'm hoping that we have a few of you who are willing in the chat box just to share any questions you have that may have come up in your breakout group discussion, or any key takeaways that you all have that you'd like to reiterate or share that didn't make it in the writing, or that did and you wanted to offer up to the group. So I'll give you a minute to think if there's anything to share in the chat window, and either questions or kind of in the interest of sharing out. Seeing some folks wondering a little bit more about Paragon, whether or not it's targeted toward high school students. I don't personally have super deep familiarity with Paragon, but we can definitely get back to you all about that. Great question about the free resources. So one thing that is worth noting is that the resources that we link are almost entirely free resources. There is one exception. There is a page. It is actually its own tool that's called optional fee-for-service resources, and it sort of culls together some resources that we've encountered in our research that may be useful to some school settings that are not necessarily free. We wanted to put them in one place so it's very obvious which ones are not free, that are not our own. They're not hosted or necessarily endorsed by CCE or DESE, but we wanted to just make sure you knew about them because they may meet a need that your school or district has. But with the exception of that one page, which is very clearly labeled as such, the other tools are all free and should not be behind any sort of paywall.
I'll briefly jump in on the Paragon one. So Paragon one is a organization that specializes in remote externships and internship experiences. They initially started focused on college-age students, but have expanded their programming down to high school students. And so it's a resource that, sort of depending on where you are in your processes, might be helpful to take a look at and make some connections with students there.
So the last thing I'll say is that I see it looks like a lot of you looked at the remote work-based learning tool, and I'm glad to see that there's stuff worth diving into further there. And I will say that was in response to what we were hearing from some of you all about some, immediate needs arising from the current circumstance with the pandemic, and some concerns even looking ahead to next year about how to ensure, placements for all students and meaningful experiences. So I'm glad that it might be useful, and we look forward to hearing how it's working for you when you start to put some of these things into practice. Next slide, Kelly. I think we're going to have to skip this slide because we are getting close to the end of the workshop. We were hoping to do a verbal takeaway, but that's why we had you do it in the chat. I do want to, in our last few minutes, close out by noting that, again, that workshop coming up in June is a great opportunity for those of you who might be prospective applicants or know any. Another thing I'd like to highlight is that we are seeking some folks to pilot a new tool that will eventually make its way onto this toolkit, which is an Innovation Pathways site self-assessment and evaluation tool. So for those of you who are launching a pathway now, or who have one that is going that you don't yet have a strong Innovation Pathways self-assessment or evaluation tool, this could potentially fill that need. I'm going to put my email address in the chat box, and I invite you to please email me if you have any interest in being one of the school sites to pilot and give us feedback on this tool. Sorry, you may have heard my son in the background. And finally, we invite you to check out our website and stay up to date about the events that will be coming in the fall. Next. Finally, as we close out today, we can stay on for a couple minutes to answer any urgent questions that might come up. Please just add them to the chat. I am seeing a request for a registration link for the June 1st workshop. And please, if one of my colleagues could chat that registration link, that would be really helpful. Otherwise, we do ask that you please follow this link on your screen to just take a quick 3-question survey to tell us how today went and any thoughts you have in terms of what could be useful in the future. We do try to build all of our webinars and workshops around what we're hearing in the field feels like important and useful information for you all, and as well as just opportunities to connect. So again, we thank you in advance for please taking that survey. It should take less than 3 minutes. And Jennifer did share out in the chat the registration link for the workshop coming up in June for those who'd like a quick click to that.
We shared the page that has kind of everything on it, including the planning grant opportunity for cohort 4, the Part A application, and then June 10th, if you scroll down and see that on the timeline, you should be able to click that and get more information and register. Just want to make sure you had it all.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Next slide, please, Kelly. Finally, we just want to close up by thanking you for your engagement today. We literally would not exist if it weren't for all of you all engaging and using these opportunities as they come and bringing fantastic learning experiences to the students of Massachusetts. Next slide. And these are some of our contact email addresses. Those of us who don't work for DESE, but that can may be able to be supportive of some of the other needs that arise. This is also where you can reach out if you're interested in piloting the evaluation and self-assessment tool in your school or district. My email address is the first on that list. Thank you so much. We wish you all a wonderful Monday and the rest of your week.